Gon' vote. Everybody gon' vote. Everybody gon' vote. Everybody gon' vote. Comrade! Labor right, them a go down, bong. Them a go down, bong. Them a go down. Is that? Margie, him a God picking. No hope their work if you touch Margie. Margie, him a God picking. No hope their work if you touch Margie. We now vote for Labour. Orange we a come out in now. If you love the PNP, who no step out for Marky G. Jamaica just come along with we. People time come, people time come, people time is up.
Only thing that's on my mind is who's gonna run this town tonight.
Yeah, I say that we are pledge of allegiance.
Who's gonna run this town tonight?
Yeah, I say that we
We gonna run this town.
Make the trumpets play. Make the trumpets play.
And the Domestic Violence Act. I was on that committee at the time. A lot of work was put in. Numerous representations were made by stakeholders who are interested in the issues of violence against women and children in particular, and other vulnerable groups, such as persons with disabilities. That report was produced and recommended a large panoply of amendments to those statutes. Nothing seems to have been done to take those matters further in terms of actually legislating those changes. And this is years now I'm talking about. But in particular in relation to the Domestic Violence Act, which directly relates to the matter at hand today, that committee felt quite strongly that the Domestic Violence Act was insufficient as a legislative framework to address the cultural and sociological, economic, emotional issues that surround gender-based violence and domestic violence in particular, and that it needed to be looked at more deeply, not just from the point of view of criminal offenses and so on, but the whole issue around how victims of such violence can be supported and can be given redress through a system that is sensitive to their needs and the realities in which they live, including often where there's some financial dependence on the violence perpetrator. And Madam Speaker, my question is, when will we see that in-depth review of the Domestic Violence Act take place? I would hope that it would be through a process which would include the public and stakeholders who have an interest in this issue, including members of the opposition, and also the other much-needed raft of reforms that were agreed in that Joint Select Committee process, but which have seemed to be lying dormant and fallow. I'm anxious to hear the response to that. The protection that our farmers have enjoyed by removing GCT from the importation of raw produce. He says that Jamaica is on the cusp of being blacklisted by the World Trade Organization, the WTO, if we continue to protect our farmers. Well, based on our research, the WTO does not blacklist or unilaterally punish member states for non-compliance. The minister really therefore needs to state whose bidding he's doing. By the removal of this protection leaves our farmers very exposed to unfair competition from importers who have little risk. We know that the rich countries of the world, North America and Europe, provide massive subsidies to their agricultural sectors, distorting fair competition and giving food imports from those countries an advantage over our producers here in Jamaica. Over the past 15 years, Food imports into Jamaica have seen a steady increase, reaching over 1.4 billion US dollars in 2022, according to Statin. In contrast, our agricultural exports lagged far behind at a mere 273 million US dollars in that year. And this is a trend, and it underscores the vulnerability of local food production. Local farmers already contend with high overhead costs, including GCT and various inputs that they use, farm supplies, which producers in other countries do not face. Jamaican farmers have other disadvantages, including their small scale, relatively speaking, reliance on rainfall rather than irrigation systems for many farmers, and limited access to mechanization and financial resources. In 2022, loans allocated to farming operations amounted to a mere 146.3 million Jamaican dollars. That's all. The removal of GCT on imported foodstuff will worsen this imbalance between locally produced and imported foods. It is likely to adversely impact the sector and the livelihood of farmers, while undermining rural communities, who are the breadbasket of our country. Only last year, we saw how onion farmers in St. Thomas were hurt badly when import permits were granted to importers and flooded the market with foreign onions, leaving our farmers with produce that they could not sell last year. In removing the GCT on the imports of produce, nothing has been put in place to protect our farmers from the wave of imports of produce that will now come into the market without paying GCT. And there's a common theme here, Mr. Speaker. When I was in St. Elizabeth recently, the fishermen were complaining bitterly that they cannot sell their lobster because big players are supplying the market at low prices and squeezing them out. Their MP is the Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries, yet they are suffering. The government is letting them down badly, and it's a crying shame. Mr. Speaker, there's also the critical necessity for transparency in the allocation of these permits for imported foodstuff to ensure that there's proper consideration for local production capacity and to eliminate the possibility for nepotism, cronyism, and other forms of corruption. And we all hear who the major importers are. Jamaica Agricultural Society, the JAS, was apparently not consulted before this measure was announced by the minister, which in itself is an egregious example of arrogant and uncaring governance.
A whopping total of 59,591 births to adolescents were recorded between 2009 and 2019. In 10 years in Jamaica, based on Statistical Institute information, 60,000 young women, underage women, girls, proper term, had a baby, not get pregnant. It not include abortion and all of that. They said gave birth. 60,000 young girls gave birth. So, Mr. President, I would like to recommend that this time, knowing that we intend for a 7-year secondary school experience, that it is sensible to review the age of consent from 16 to 18. Because if we want them to be in school, then sex creates a risk of 49% already being there. Make a look what UNICEF said. The reasons for age of consent, because a man might have said, so they're not big picnic. The age of consent is a tool used in the society to achieve some outcomes. The UNICEF reasons for age of consent, the objective of a minimum age of sexual consent is to protect adolescents from sexual abuse, from the consequences of early sexual activity on their rights and on their development. One of the greatest consequences of early sexual activity is that they will become pregnant and lose their future. It further says that young adolescents may be lured into sexual activity by older adults based on our Jamaican circumstances here now, in exchange for goods. And that goods could be take off the G and say food. You know how much of these nasty men out there about KFC and fast food to lure our little young girls suffering from the economic circumstances and poverty that they're in. The UNICEF says to protect them, making those from disadvantaged settings and poor background particularly at risk. This 42% is not equally distributed among the 5 quintiles of income. The highest income quintiles don't have 42%. The lowest quintiles who go into something and get $500. I have experienced. I took 400 kids from East Rural St. Andrew, Senator Bunting, and I took them up to UWI for 3 weeks to give them that experience. And one day I sat with the girls. They told me that, but sir, me get $300 from him a daytime. $300 from the person taking advantage of them. Some of them mothers were encouraging participation because it was a tool. They were basically sex workers for their family. We have to do something. It's a state of emergency.
State of emergency.
Underage sexual activity based on the recommendations of UNICEF presents a number of risks in relation to sexual and reproductive health, including unwanted or early pregnancy and exposure to sexually transmitted diseases. Early pregnancy and motherhood is in turn a primary determinant of school attendance. If we want to extend the secondary experience to 7 years, we must consider the age of consent to be moved from 16 to 18.
Ball out! Whoa, yo. We need help, Jesus. Jamaica need help. Shift the parliament. Shift the election. Shift everything. Remove them out there. Take out the cockroach. Take out the thief. Take out the criminal them. Take out the thief them. Take out the murderer them. Take out the gang leader them. Out of parliament. Take them out from Portland. Take them out. I hear Portland. Me I go to Portland. Why me I travel to Portland? Take out somebody. Man.